A $4.8 billion missile complex went silent in southern Ukraine. Not damaged. Silent. Launchers frozen. Command vehicles locked down. Strike schedules rewritten across 3 fronts. What followed wasn't a warning. It was a bill. This wasn't random. This was surgical. And the weapon that triggered the collapse cost less than 1% of what it destroyed. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear isn't chaos. It was calculation. Roughly $5 billion in hardware, personnel, and operational capacity removed from the board in one night. And the follow-on cost? Weeks of recalibration. Months of lost tempo. Years of doctrinal revision. Russia didn't just lose launchers. It lost confidence in the system that was supposed to make launchers untouchable. Here's what happened. The trap was set long before the strike. Southern Ukraine. Kherson Oblast. The west bank of the Dnipro River had become a kill zone for anything that moved, and Russia knew it. So they adapted. They pulled their most valuable systems, Iskander-M missile complexes, farther east. Deeper into the rear. Into zones they controlled. Zones they could defend. Smart, right? It would have been. Except consolidation has a shadow cost. When you compress high-value assets into fewer locations, you don't just concentrate firepower. You concentrate dependency. Every launcher. Every reload vehicle. Every command module. All funneled into a handful of hardened sites. And that makes the math brutal. Lose one site, lose a disproportionate chunk of your strike capacity. If you were hunting the most valuable target in theater, where would you look? At the front? Or at the place where everything the front depends on is parked in neat rows, close enough to refuel in rotation? Ukraine chose the second option. At 6:14 p.m., April 27, satellite overwatch detected convoy movement. Fuel trucks. Reload vehicles. Maintenance crews rotating in. Standard procedure for an Iskander complex preparing for a multi-day strike window. Russia had done this 100 times. No flags. No deviations. Just routine. Routine is what killed them. The doctrine that built the blind spot. Here's what Russia prepared for: high-altitude strike packages. NATO-style cruise missiles. Fast movers with big radar signatures. That's the doctrine. That's the threat model. So they layered defenses accordingly. Panzer S-1 systems covering the airspace. Tor M2 batteries scanning mid-altitude corridors. EW pods jamming GPS and data link frequencies. It looked invincible. And against the threats it was designed for? It probably was. But here's the flaw. Doctrine optimizes for the expected. And the expected creates a gap. While Russian air defense stared at the sky, Ukraine was studying the ground. Not the perimeter. The interior. Not the perimeter. The interior. The logistics tail. The reload cycles. The 10-minute windows when launchers were stationary, fuel lines connected, crews outside the vehicles. That's not a target. That's a dependency map. And Ukraine had been watching it for weeks. Patience as a weapon. No broadcasts. No leaks. No early positioning that could trigger a defensive shift. Ukraine waited. Not for permission. Not for optimal weather. They waited for compression. For the moment when the maximum number of high-value assets would be concentrated in the smallest possible space, all doing the same thing at the same time. You don't get that moment by hoping. You get it by watching. And Ukraine watched. They knew the refuel schedule. They knew the crew rotation intervals. They knew the traffic patterns inside the compound. They knew when the systems would be static, when the command vehicles would be clustered, when the defensive posture would briefly relax because nothing had ever gotten through before. if you knew all of that, how long would you wait? As long as it took. At 7:51 p.m., the convoy finished the first stage of refueling. Launchers stationary. Trucks still connected. Crews standing outside the cabs. Maintenance teams running diagnostics on launcher hydraulics. Defensive radars still scanning. But focused outward. High. Far. That pause costs Russia at least one launch window. The silence before the collapse. Here's what didn't happen: increased radio chatter. Perimeter alerts. Unusual drone activity. Defensive repositioning. Nothing. And that nothing? That was the signal. In modern warfare, silence isn't safety. It's camouflage. When an adversary goes quiet after weeks of probing, they're not giving up. They're positioning. And the absence of noise is the loudest warning you'll never hear. Russian air defense didn't see it that way. They interpreted calm as confirmation. No contacts. No threats. Another uneventful shift rotation in progress. Confidence became exposure. At 8:34 p.m., radar operators logged a high-altitude contact inbound from the northwest. Fast. Medium signature. Panzer S-1 batteries swiveled. Engagement protocols activated. Fire control radar locked on. And that's when the math went sideways. The inbound contact was a decoy. Cheap. Disposable. Built to look threatening enough to force a response. And it worked. Russian air defense spent a six-figure interceptor to swat a target worth maybe $5,000. The cost imbalance was brutal. But the operational cost was worse. Because while every sensor was locked on that decoy, attention wasn't on the interior anymore. Coverage thinned. Awareness shifted. And that shift opened a window measured in seconds. The 10-second window. Here's what Ukraine needed: one gap. One moment when defensive focus was elsewhere and the target was stationary. They didn't need chaos. They didn't need overwhelm. They needed a sliver of time when the most valuable missile complex in southern Ukraine was unprotected at the exact instant a precision strike package was inbound. At 8:41 p.m., that window opened. Ukraine executed. High-level precision fires. Not loud. Not theatrical. Surgical. Targeting not just the launchers, but the reload infrastructure. The command vehicles. The fuel logistics. The maintenance bays. Everything that made the complex operational. The system worked. That's why it failed. 6 hours later, the immediate collapse. By 2 a.m., Russian command had the damage assessment. 4 Iskander-M launchers destroyed or mission incapable. 2 command vehicles eliminated. Reload vehicles incinerated. Fuel depot secondaries still burning. Personnel casualties significant. But here's the part that doesn't show up in satellite images. Downstream paralysis. No launchers. No strikes. No pressure on Ukrainian rear logistics for 72 hours minimum. Offensive operations in Zaporizhia axis paused. Artillery interdiction schedules rewritten. Close air support sorties in Kherson delayed pending threat reassessment. That delay removes a full strike cycle from the week. 24 hours later, the schedule rewrite. Russian doctrine assumes a certain tempo. A certain readiness. Iskander-M complexes are supposed to provide responsive, long-range precision fires on demand. When one goes offline, you don't just lose one launcher. You lose the entire operational assumption built around it. Backup systems existed. But they were elsewhere. Moving them meant exposure. Exposure meant risk. Risk meant delay. From that point forward, Russia wasn't choosing when to strike. It was waiting to be ready again. 72 hours later, the cost compounding. 3 days after the strike, Russian logistics was still rerouting. Replacement launchers were in transit but slowly. Moving high-value systems across contested airspace meant convoys, and convoys meant vulnerability. Every kilometer traveled was a gamble. Meanwhile, Ukraine adjusted. Freed from the threat of immediate Iskander strikes, they repositioned artillery, reinforced forward logistics, pushed supplies closer to the contact line. Russia's loss wasn't just material. It was tempo. It was initiative. Readiness becomes conditional instead of assumed. The cheap versus the expensive. Let's talk cost. The entire strike package, drones, decoys, precision munitions, likely cost Ukraine somewhere between $8 and $12 million. Total. The Russian Iskander-M complex? $4.8 billion. That's not just hardware. That's training, maintenance, logistics infrastructure, personnel, years of operational integration. So Ukraine spent 1/400th of the target's value to destroy it. And the follow-on operational cost to Russia? Immeasurable. You can't price lost tempo. You can't invoice paralysis. But you can see it. In the pauses. In the rewritten schedules. In the strikes that didn't happen. Throughput drops not to zero, but low enough to matter. What Russia built, Ukraine studied. Here's the lesson. Russia built a system optimized for strength. Layered defenses. Hardened positions. Doctrine designed to counter NATO-level threats. And on paper, it worked. It should have worked. But strength without adaptability is rigidity. And rigidity is just another word for predictability. Ukraine didn't try to overpower that system. They studied it. Found the dependency. Found the timing. Found the 10-second window when all that strength was pointed the wrong direction. This wasn't protection. It was rigidity. Why timing beats strength? Modern warfare isn't won by who has the most firepower. It's won by who controls the tempo. Who decides when and where the fight happens? Who forces the enemy to react instead of act? Russia had the launchers, the missiles, the range, the doctrine. And it didn't matter. Because Ukraine controlled the timing. They chose the moment, the location, the method. Russia was reacting the entire time, and by the time they realized it, the window had already closed. Prestige created predictability. The second-order effect no one talks about. Losing a missile complex hurts. But the deeper wound? Doctrinal confidence. Russian commanders now have to ask, if this site was hit, are the others vulnerable? If this method worked once, will it work again? If our defenses didn't see it coming, what else are we missing? That doubt is poison. It slows decisions. It adds layers of caution. It turns launch on command into launch when we're sure it's safe. And in a high-tempo environment, that hesitation costs more than hardware. Efficiency became exposure. What's the next weakness? So here's the question. If Ukraine found the dependency in one of Russia's most protected systems, what's next? Where else is confidence masking vulnerability? Where else is routine creating exposure? Because this wasn't a one-time breakthrough. This was proof of concept. Proof that no system is untouchable if you understand its rhythm. Its doctrine. Its blind spots. The next weakness is already there. Someone just has to be patient enough to find it. Comment your take. Like, subscribe, and follow for more clear breakdowns.